This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 1.
Hello, America. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the nation. The phone number, 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, happy to have you with me. We've got to begin with what played out in Washington, D.C. over the weekend, as Hamas supporters they like to call themselves pro-Palestinian supporters, decided to riot in Lafayette Park. It sounds very insurrection-y, if you ask me. They hurled objects, including water bottles, at park rangers and police. They forced back the Secret Service away from Lafayette Park. It was just this bizarre scene of violence, very insurrection-y. They defaced a statue in Lafayette Park of Rochambeau, one of the French heroes of the Revolutionary War. They spray painted with pro-Gaza, pro-Hamas graffiti. They hung a Palestinian flag. Now, no one's getting arrested. The police say they attempted to arrest one person, and they, got away. So the police don't know where to go to get the person. Now, let's contrast that with this. Late last week, under the prosecution overseen by the Biden Justice Department, an 75-year-old wheelchair-bound grandmother got carted off to prison for praying at an abortion clinic. I bet this story didn't make national news for you. Did you hear about this? If you're conservative, you probably did. If you're not, did you know? One of the things the Biden administration has done for the first time, something even Barack Obama did not do, is aggressively prosecute pro-life protesters at abortion clinics. There is a law, the FACE Act, that allows the prosecution of pro-lifers who protest at abortion clinics if they obstruct access. Now, in fairness, the woman who is going to jail, she is going to go to jail because she went into the abortion clinic and she prayed there. Some of the people who were with her bound themselves to make it difficult for them to be removed. And that is a violation of federal law. It's true. It's a violation of federal law. This legislation allows you to stand outside an abortion clinic and peacefully say prayers and protest. But if you obstruct someone's access, this law says you go to jail. This 75-year-old grandmother went into the abortion clinic with others who chained themselves in place and was praying. She's going to jail. But here's the thing. How many of the pro-Hamas protesters are going to go to jail for defacing federal property, for in some cases chaining themselves on college campuses or blocking access to libraries or other things so Jews couldn't get in? How many of them are actually going to be protested? Not a single one of the people in Lafayette Park this weekend is going to go to jail. Not a single one of them is arrested. There is video of them throwing water bottles and other objects at a park ranger. Now, I want to step back a little bit because I need to say something that will make some of you uncomfortable. I was talking with my buddy Shelly Winter about this morning. He's filling in for a friend of mine, my flagship station. Something that I think white people sometimes don't realize, middle income, upper income white people, is that poor whites, black and Hispanic people in this country do have a different system of justice. And it has been. And the problem, you and I immediately flip the switch to turn our brain off when we hear this because so many people make it a race issue, and it's not a race issue. And the people, the race hustlers out there who make it a race issue, they make it a race issue. They say it's black people have a separate system of justice from white people. That's not actually true. It's a class system. Rich black people and rich white people all have a very good system of justice. O.J. Simpson. He got off. It's poor people. Poor whites in Appalachia, poor blacks and Hispanics in the inner cities of America. It's a double standard. It's a double standard. Now, I need to pause myself real quick and say, for you two here, Charlie says my voice sounds fine, but the music sounds weird. So, sorry, we're having a technical difficulty. You probably heard when we started the show, but it's all right. We're fixing it. We have geniuses who work for us. Now, here's the problem. It is a class issue. So I was a public defender, and I defended a number of mostly young black men, and I was a terrible public defender, but I helped every single one of them. They were all guilty, by the way. All of them were guilty. But I was a public defender. They couldn't hire a good lawyer. They were stuck with me, someone who didn't want to. Wait, that's playing over the air. Okay. They were required to be stuck with me unless they could afford a lawyer. It was a two-tier system of justice, and I did the best I could for them. I wasn't a great lawyer. They were all guilty. I mean, they were all guilty. And privately, they'd all admitted, and I was able to get some of them out of jail altogether. Some of them was able to get them reduced sentences, largely because I was a nice guy and the prosecutors liked me. The problem isn't that. And there's always been a system with celebrities. Celebrities, we've always given the benefit of the doubt. People talk about Scotty Scheffler being arrested and the charges being dropped. And, no. Tiger Woods had this terrible wreck, appeared to have been abusing substances and was never even mugshotted or booked for when that happened. There was one time he was, one time he wasn't. Celebrities get away with stuff. The problem here is what we're finding, and this isn't just the Democrats, it is both sides increasingly, but we see it on vivid display with the Democrats right now, embracing the idea of Oscar Benavides, Peru's general who was in charge of Peru after a military coup, who said, "For my friends, everything, for my enemies, the law." For my friends, everything, for my enemies, the law. That's what Joe Biden is doing here. The Hamas protesters who vandalized the statue in Washington, D.C., who barred Jews from libraries, who chained themselves down, the ecological protesters who glue themselves to the sidewalks, they get every benefit of the doubt. They're treated compassionately by the media. They're treated compassionately by the Justice Department. They're treated compassionately by Joe Biden. Joe Biden's spokesman today is actually out there telling us that this was freedom of speech. They were exercising their rights to protest, according to Joe Biden's spokesman. No, listen to this.
Thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters rallied outside the White House, urging the president to halt military aid to Israel and calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. How are these persistent protests weighing on the campaign?
Well, first of all, President Biden certainly, unlike President Trump, supports the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression.
So, unlike Donald Trump, he supports free speech and free expression. They vandalized statues. They threw water bottles at park rangers. The Secret Service had to retreat. But a grandmother in a wheelchair is going to go to jail because she prayed in an abortion clinic. For my friends, everything. For my enemies, the law. That's the problem we have with Joe Biden and Merrick Garland and this Justice Department. When people showed up at Supreme Court justices' houses after Roe v. Wade went away, there's a specific federal law that prohibits protest outside the homes of federal judges. Merrick Garland refused to enforce it. Not until someone showed up at Brett Kavanaugh's house attempting to murder him did they take it seriously. For my friends, everything. For my enemies, the law. If this pattern continues, and it's not going to stop, both sides descend into this. Both sides will do this. You've got my friend Russ Vought. There's a profile of him in the Washington Post trying to scare people that Russ Vought would be in charge if Donald Trump becomes president. Russ is actually highly competent. If Russ Vought were in charge as the chief of staff in Trump's White House, it would be a huge win for conservatives for him to be. And the Washington Post tried to say he's a post-constitutionalist. And you know, maybe Russ is. I'm not. And I think that those who believe we're post-constitutional, when they get into court, the judges that Trump has appointed thus far, including at the Supreme Court, will stop them cold in this idea that we're post-constitutional. But there is this growing sense in our society that the left ignores the Constitution, so why should the right be bound to it? For my friends, everything. For my enemies, the law. This Justice Department under Joe Biden is not going to prosecute people who assaulted park rangers in Washington, D.C. because they were pro-Hamas and Joe Biden needs their votes. But they are going to prosecute and have prosecuted and sent to prison a 75-year-old grandmother who is confined to a wheelchair because she went to an abortion clinic and prayed inside the abortion clinic. It's offensive to me. This administration has been very, very aggressive in punishing pro-lifers. And this administration has been very, very aggressive in turning a blind eye towards growing anti-Semitism. They can't even denounce anti-Semitism without doing a both sides. We've also got to denounce Islamophobia. When Donald Trump spoke after Charlottesville, Donald Trump said that he denounced the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis. He was very explicit in denouncing the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis and said, but there were very fine people on both sides otherwise. What about the alt-left that came charging, as you say, at the alt-right? Trump said, do they have some semblance of guilt? I've condemned the neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all these people were neo-Nazis. You had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists. The press has treated them absolutely unfairly. You had some very fine people on both sides. He's talking about the protesters there over the statue of Robert E. Lee. There were very fine people on both sides, those opposed to taking down the statue and those who supported taking down the statue. He specifically condemned the, quote, neo-Nazis and white nationalists. But the media has vilified him to say that this very fine people that he's referring to the white nationalists. That's not true. What is true is that the Biden administration has embraced this some very fine people on both sides moment and has thoroughly embraced the idea that these Hamas supporters who would attack a park ranger and police are very fine people who are just exercising their First Amendment rights. And it's all because for Joe Biden, he needs their votes. And in needing their votes, he has to turn a blind eye to what they've done. But the pro-lifer he knows is never going to vote for him, so even though she's 75 and in a wheelchair, off to jail she can go. For my friends, everything. For my enemies, the law in Joe Biden's America.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. The holidays are here, and you know what that means. It's time to get your friends and family the gifts they deserve. Take the stress out of shopping with Amazon's great deals and low prices on a huge range of items from toys to tech and much more. Whoever you're gifting for, Amazon has great prices on everything you need this holiday season. Shop Amazon for all your gifting needs.
Gremlins got into the system over the weekend. We are working on dealing with it. It's somebody comes in and uses the computer and then doesn't change their stuff out. So the joys of working in radio. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, I am happy to have you. I got a note, speaking of justice in Washington. It's not just the Merrick Garland situation. Matthew Graves is who Joe Biden put in charge as the U.S. attorney. And he, this is so bizarre to me. A DC carjacker crashed vehicles with an elderly woman inside of it after having carjacked it. He killed her, and it was very near the U.S. Attorney's office of Matthew Graves. Matthew Graves is the one who has turned his office into an effort to go after Donald Trump, Leonard Leo, many other conservatives out there. And it took 3 days for him to drop murder and kidnapping charges in the carjacking case. So carjacker carjacks a car with a woman in it, elderly woman, a grandmother. She stays in the car. He crashes the car, the carjacker does. The grandmother dies near the front steps of the D.C. U.S. Attorney's office, and he has dropped the murder and kidnapping charges against the carjacker. Decided those would be excessive charges. I gotta shake up the show from what I was going to talk about in large part because there's so much here. But here are the problems that Joe Biden has. I was reading a very smart email this weekend from John Ellis. He has an email that I subscribe to, and he was referencing conversations with the Democrats. You got inflation, immigration, and infirmity, the three I's bothering Joe Biden. He can't do anything about inflation. He can't do anything about infirmity. And what he's doing about immigration isn't helping, and the cascading effect with immigration relates then into crime and other issues, and he's not having an impact on those. And there's a growing body of Democrats out there looking at this, and they're beginning to be really perturbed that if you think Donald Trump is a real threat to democracy, you must do something immediately because you're not going to be able to stop him. You're not going to be able to stop him, Joe. But Joe Biden has a chip on his shoulder. And for those of you who are convinced he's just going to drop out, he may drop out. I'm not saying he's not going to. But you underestimate the chip on his shoulder where he's convinced that he really can and wants to prove everyone wrong that he can stop Trump. It's a real problem that the Democrats have to deal with. Now, I want to tell you guys, I get a lot of questions about Swiss America, and I want you to know they've now got a great YouTube channel. Their CEO is there. You can go to youtube.com/Swiss America. There is the secret war on cash that's out there right now. And you've got, for example, the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They're buying up the gold reserves, driving up the price of gold right now, banking on calamity coming to the U.S. stock market. And Swiss America wants to help you protect your hard-earned assets. They want to teach you how. They're rated A+ by the Better Business Bureau, and they can educate you on how to protect your assets. But you need to read their report, The Secret War on Cash, on what's going on. So what you can do is call or text my name, Eric, to 800-289-2646, 800-289-2646. The All-Out War on Cash, it includes digital forms of currency, too. Go read the Secret War on Cash report, completely free. Just mention me, Eric, when you call or text 800-289-2646. That's 800-289-2646. Or go to SwissAmerica.com/Eric, ERICK. Keep in mind, message and data rates may apply. Every time we think we've got it figured out, someone can. So I realize this is very in the weeds for you guys who are listening, but so those things that we play, they're set. So when I come back, 9 seconds and seconds later they play. Someone apparently came into the studio this weekend and fired up a second player, And we keep thinking we've turned the player off, but it keeps restarting itself. It's got a mind of its own today. I, however, am not in duplicate. There is so much of me you could never duplicate it. So, physically and mentally. The phone number here, 877-973-7425. If you want to be on the program, we would love to have you. Kamala Harris this weekend. A serious note here, and I realize for those of you who aren't on my side, this will come across as very partisan. And I actually don't mean this to be partisan. But I'm really genuinely, frightfully concerned about the state of the political left in the country right now. On Saturday, Israel rescued 4 Jewish hostages, and they were alive. Here's Senator Tom Cotton. He was speaking on one of the Sunday shows.
But my advice to them would be, if you don't want your people killed in hostage rescue missions, then you shouldn't take hostages in the first place. You should release them once you have, and you certainly shouldn't hide them in civilian areas. So hats off to the Israeli security forces for a fantastic day in rescuing these 4 hostages.
Well said. Some of the hostages were being held by a reporter. It was originally reported the guy reported for Al Jazeera. That's not true. He reported for something called the Palestinian Chronicle. It's an American 501c3 nonprofit that this guy was reporting for, and he was reporting about the Israeli atrocities in Gaza. Meanwhile, he was holding hostages for Hamas, these hostages having been kidnapped on October 7th. A doctor and his family were holding hostages, using them as slave labor, we believe, based on the reports of how they've been interviewed thus far. They were treated cruelly by the doctor, treated cruelly by the reporter, held against their will. The doctor and his family, the reporter and his family, they've all been killed by the Israelis who stormed into the houses and rescued the 4 hostages alive. The death toll amounts to 200 to 250 residents of Gaza. Now, here's the thing you must know, and this is true. I'm not making this up. The Hamas and Gaza representatives do not actually distinguish between civilians and military personnel. So when they say 250 residents or civilians in Gaza were killed, it could very well be that a number of those were Hamas agents, including, we know they're counting in this, the doctor and the reporter and their families who were holding the Israeli hostages. Kamala Harris this weekend in Detroit lamented the deaths of the Gaza civilians. Lamented the deaths of the Gaza civilians. You know how you could have prevented the civilians from dying was not take hostages. Jake Sullivan was on with Dana Bash over the weekend talking about this on CNN.
And last, just about the mission, you don't want to specifically say how the U.S. was involved, which I understand, but just broadly, big picture, no one can deny the amazing news of seeing these innocent civilians who were finally brought back to their families from Gaza after being held there for 8 months. But is the U.S. comfortable with the way that the Israelis carried out the mission?
Look, Dana, why is President Biden going out publicly and calling for a ceasefire and hostage deal? It's because he thinks the best way to get all of the hostages home is in a deal where they're brought out diplomatically, where there's no need for military operations to get every last hostage out. So that would obviously be the best solution to this. In the absence of that, without Hamas saying yes to the deal, unfortunately...
And last, just about the mission,
replaying there. These civilians were, of course, going to die because Hamas held the hostages in civilian areas. That's a war crime, by the way. Notice that all the people blasting Israel for killing 250 Gazans are not lamenting that Hamas held the hostages in civilian areas, which is a war crime. There are lots of people who scream war crimes about Israel. This is an actual war crime under the Geneva Convention, and no one is blasting Hamas. The people who hate Israel are not blasting Hamas. So I started to get a little distracted by all this with the audio and stuff. The issue here is I'm really concerned that the left in the United States is becoming very much an arm of Hamas, an agent of Hamas, a sympathizer of Hamas. I want to read for you a tweet. This is from Crystal Ball, a real name. Crystal Ball does a show called Breaking Points. She's the author of a book, The Populist Guide to 2020. Listen to this. If Hamas committed a bloody massacre of Israelis to rescue 4 Palestinians, it would be universally condemned. I need to read you this again. If Hamas committed a bloody massacre of Israelis to rescue 4 Palestinians, it would be universally condemned. Hamas committed a bloody massacre of Israelis on October 7th, and these hostages were taken by Hamas on October 7th. Omar Badr is some sympathizer, progressive political analyst, sympathetic to the Palestinians, was on CNN, and he made this point: to celebrate an operation that kills hundreds of Palestinians to save 4 Israelis is to openly say Palestinian lives are worth less than the Israeli ones. If Hamas killed 200 Israelis to rescue 4 Palestinians from Israeli dungeons, our government would be condemning, not celebrating. Here's the problem. These weren't Israeli dungeons. These were civilian homes that these people were put in by Hamas. You should be condemning Hamas, not Israel. Except they can't condemn Hamas. They can only condemn Israel. The anti-Semitism flows in attacks against Israel. But also, then, can we put this another way, that clearly Hamas must have valued the lives of the Israelis more than the Palestinians to put them there? If this is to say Palestinian lives are worth less than the Israeli ones, is it that because of where Hamas put the Israelis? But what's remarkable is the American left. The American left is unwilling or unable to deal honestly with this situation. The American left is sympathetic to Hamas at the expense of its own integrity, at the expense of what is right. These hostages were captured because Hamas invaded Israel during a time of peace, captured them and carried them back. We should be rejoicing. By the way, in the history of war, we have celebrated bold rescues of hostages in times of war. There's this movie. It's very relevant given this time of year. Very relevant. There's this movie about a guy behind enemy lines, and all of heaven and all of earth is moved to save this one guy. It's a very famous award-winning movie. You might have heard of it, called Saving Private Ryan. The American military behind enemy lines killed a lot of Nazis to save Private Ryan. Should we condemn the American military because Private Ryan was a fiction, but it was based on real stories in war? Was it wrong of them to kill the Nazis? The civilians died because Hamas chose to hold the hostages there. It's a logical consequence when Israel was coming to save their own if that was going to happen. And the fact that the American left is mad at Israel and not Hamas is a damning indictment on the morality of the American left. It's a damning indictment on the views of the left, and it's a shameful thing that the Vice President of the United States would take time to lament those dead. And the reason they're doing it is because the reason she's doing it is because she and Joe Biden need their votes. They need the votes of the terror sympathizers. You know, Kamala Harris, for those of you on my flagship station in Atlanta, she's coming back to your city to screw up your traffic on Friday. I saw the look on your face. She's coming back to tie up the traffic on Friday because she's talking to a gathering of black men in Atlanta because, I'm sure. Okay, so, the irony here is that many of those black men, had they lived in California when Kamala Harris was Attorney General, would have gone to jail probably. She would have overseen it. Kamala Harris loved to round up black men and send them to jail. Willie Brown's side chick has this huge habit of sending black men not named Willie Brown to jail. And now she's going to come look these black men in the eye and say nothing about what she did. So she'll stand on stage and she'll lament the dead terrorists in Gaza. But she's not going to stand on stage and say, I apologize for making my law and order career about rounding up young black men and throwing them in prison. And that's how I got elected to the Senate, by showing people that I was tough on crime. She's not going to say that to them. She's going to tell them that she needs them to stop Donald Trump, who let a lot of young black men out of prison with his First Steps Act. Joe Biden, it should be remembered, is the man who signed the legislation or wrote the legislation, the three strikes law. Joe Biden wrote the three strikes law to show that Democrats were tough on crime, threw a lot of young black men in prison. And as they aged, it was Donald Trump who came in and signed the First Steps Act and let a lot of them out of prison. And now Kamala Harris is going to go tell these people, many of whom probably know people affected by Joe Biden's three strikes law, that he needs them to stop Donald Trump, who let those friends of theirs out of prison. Wow. Wow. This is the age in which we live. By the way, this is why so many young black men and older men are moving to Donald Trump. I mentioned this at the beginning of May. I had a donor conference in Las Vegas, and I went downstairs to the craps table one morning. There's an older black gentleman who was the floor manager. We strike up a conversation. He recognizes my voice. He listens to me on the radio out there. Says he's not a conservative, but that's the station he listens to when he comes into work. And he says, I can't vote for Joe Biden. He says, I don't know that I'll vote for Donald Trump, but I can't vote for Joe Biden because I got relatives who went to jail because of the three strikes law that Joe Biden wrote. Says, and two of his relatives, I believe it was, got out of jail. One for sure, I think it was two, got out of jail because of Donald Trump's First Step Act. Says he can't vote for Joe Biden because of the three strikes law that Joe Biden authored to show that Democrats would be tough on crime. And now you consider in Washington, D.C., the hellscape it's become because Joe Biden's U.S. attorney refuses to prosecute crimes. Black neighborhoods are less safe today than they were 10 years ago because Joe Biden has overcorrected on the issue of crime. And now black moms and dads are scared to let their kids go outside at night in the neighborhood because of crime. Police don't want to go there. Police have been vilified by the Democrats. Police have been made to be the bad guys. And Kamala Harris wants their vote. But meanwhile, Hamas protesters can throw water bottles and rocks and other objects at park rangers and police in Washington, D.C., and the Biden administration will proudly announce this is their free speech right and no one will be prosecuted. But grandma goes to the abortion clinic to pray. My God, she's going to jail for 2 years for praying at an abortion clinic. This is the Democrats' America, and it's the one for which the backlash is building. And the Democrats are going to find out how bad it is at the end of the day. Now, I got to tell you about Americans for Prosperity. They're taking people to the border. They're going down the American for Prosperity Foundation, taking people to the border to see the problems at the border. And then Americans for Prosperity has set up a website called Secure Border, SecureAmerica.com, where they've got real solutions on how we can solve the border situation with more law enforcement, with Border Patrol, more funding for Border Wall, more technology in areas where Border Wall isn't effective. And there are parts of the border where you can't have a border wall, but you can have real technology. And these are simple solutions, and they just want to remind you that we've got them. We don't need deep out-of-the-box thinking. We already know what's possible. If you go to Secure Border, SecureAmerica.com, you can find out more about those solutions and also how you can be involved in reminding Congress of these necessary changes. Secure Border, SecureAmerica.com, website brought to you by Americans for Prosperity, a do tank, not a think tank. They go into the states. They do the business of the conservative movement. Americans for Prosperity has set this website up for you to see. Secure Border, SecureAmerica.com. Welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the United States. The phone number is 877-973-7425. This hour of the program brought to you by First Liberty Building and Loan. If you're buying a building or you're building a building or you're buying a franchise for your business and you need $250,000 or more, they can help you, my friends. First Liberty Building and Loan. They are maybe in Noonan, Georgia, but don't let that deter you. I think I've tried to log in so many times it's now blocking me. We're y'all the gremlins today. In any event, First Liberty, reach out to them, firstlibertyga.com, firstlibertyga.com, should you need this access. Now, I gotta move on to other stuff here real quick because have you heard about the minimum wage fallout now in California? My buddy David Bonson notes this piece from the New York Post now. 10,000 jobs have been lost. 10,000 jobs have been lost since California decided to raise its minimum wage to $20 an hour for fast food restaurants. You know, and they exempted fast food restaurants that sell bread. Why? Because Panera. Panera Bread's franchisee in California is a huge donor to Gavin Newsom. So when they raised the wage for fast food restaurants to $20 an hour, they put in a provision exempting fast food restaurants that sell bread. I'm not making that up. So McDonald's and the others, they could, of course, like start selling their buns as standalone items and maybe bring it down. But this is the problem. The minimum wage is zero. No matter how many people on the left insist they can manufacture an artificial minimum wage, the minimum wage is actually zero. That economic law is never going to be repealed because you can cut people out. The number of restaurants in California that are now having to cut businesses. Rubio's, which is a big Mexican chain there, they've closed 48 locations. Bar Moreno is a restaurant in San Francisco and a franchise, and they have decided to close down multiple locations. Cinnabon in Auntie Anne's Pretzels. They have said, quote, due to economic conditions that need to be met to make money, we must downsize. They are closing 5 Cinnabon and 5 Auntie Anne locations in San Francisco. In McDonald's, they are rapidly transitioning to kiosks for ordering and laying off employees. Excalibur Pizza is a chain of restaurants and a franchise of Round Table Pizzas. They're cutting 73 drivers, 21% of its workforce. Foster's Freeze, a very famous franchise in California, they are cutting employees. Pizza Hut, I didn't even know they still had standalone Pizza Huts anymore. They're not as good as they were in the 80s, y'all. 2 large Pizza Hut operators in California are laying off all their delivery drivers, impacting hundreds of locations. Subway Restaurant is also downsizing the number of stores. A reduction of stores in San Francisco and Los Angeles because of the increase. El Pollo Loco said that it's going to automate salsa making and as many other things as it possibly can. And Burger King, 180 Burger King restaurants in the state are losing employees because they raised the minimum wage. Conservatives said this would happen. We remain right.